SC Media is proud to present this month's CISO Stories program, hosted by yours truly, Jessica Hoffman. This is a show where CISOs share tales from the trenches and unpack leadership lessons learned along the way. Listen to previous CISO Stories podcast episodes at CISOstoriespodcast.com. The Cyber Risk Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, please visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/CRC. Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to another month's episode of CISO Stories Podcast. You got myself, Jess Hoffman, as your host today, and we got Ian Washburn with us today, the Deputy CISO for Notre Dame. That is like so impressive. I'm like, wow. When your bio came through, I was like, yes, we got to talk to this gentleman. I love that in education. I think I had one other, the Temple University CISOs my girl was on, but you being in the education higher learning space, I can't wait to talk about your cybersecurity experience. How are you today, Ian?
I'm doing great, Jess. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about it. Better threat intel between public and private sector. So I know education is, you can get grouped into the education, state, local, and education, as far as support from the federal and state government and so forth. Plus, Notre Dame is a private or community college, right? It's not a state college, right? So you got
That's
that
correct. Yeah,
aspect as well. So you
that's
probably
right.
you dealing with both aspects, being in compliant with federal and state and other regulatory requirements from an education perspective, but then you also have private donors and stakeholders, and it being a public privately funded and owned educational facility. So let's talk about that. So what's your experience with how you get your information? How do you stay secure over there? What you got going on?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Notre Dame is a great place to work. We are highly involved in the higher ed community. I've been with Notre Dame for going on 4 years now, and before that, I was with Indiana University. So I spent a lot of time in the higher education space, and specifically here in Indiana. Notre Dame again, participating in groups like EDUCAUSE, the Research and Education Network ISAC, and also my participation in the Redwood group. Really, I think, we rely on our neighbors to share our intelligence information, what we are augmenting that's coming from federal sources. So I think it's a great community to be in. Notre Dame does a great job at cybersecurity.
That's awesome. You mentioned the Redwood Project. I know I heard that before, or Redwood Group. I heard that before, but besides when we first talked, I wasn't really involved. I think it's an invite only, so super secret, but great mission. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about it, what your role is there and what you get from it, especially from your position in education, but just anything that you think our listeners, regardless of the industry that they're in, could benefit from.
Absolutely. So the Redwood Project, this iteration of the Redwood Project is kind of a play on the original Redwood Project. Was a group of scientists that got together around the nuclear project during World War II. This group is built on the need for better communication between federal government, private industry, and education. So the group, I think, was stood up 3 years ago. I joined last year in October to join them and helping to start understanding and approaching legislation to this new paradigm shift where the federal government is looking for state and local governments to take on more of the cybersecurity responsibility.
I didn't realize that the Redwood, and maybe that's where I heard of it before from the
That's right.
from back with the nuclear, because and just made me think as far as threat landscape, cybersecurity wasn't
Yeah,
even thought back then, right?
that's right. That's right.
um, yeah, well, that's as a public servant, working for the city, I've worked for state and federal for that matter. there's kind of like, I don't want to call it a buzzword, but it's, a saying, a phrase now, whole and state approach. So I know PA, we do the whole state approach where the state's looking to really centralize like the visibility across all the counties when it comes to continuous monitoring, incident response, procuring software, tools, resources, professional services, all that. But the whole and state approach concept, and the federal government too has adopted that. So, what is your take on, this shift, especially with this administration, for better, for worse, whatever, but we have seen that there's significant cuts in cybersecurity services that state, local governments, education, tribal have depended on for, various reasons. They depended on the skills, the tools, all of that, the strategic planning as well. So what do you think? How is that really going to impact when we're talking about public and private sectors and the communication and threat intel between?
Yeah, absolutely. One, I just want to say, I think Indiana is much like your state in where we're taking a whole of state approach. Indiana CISO, Hemant Jain, and the Indiana Office of Technology, I think has been working to kind of adapt and figure out what their new process looks like for data sharing. The challenge, I think, becomes when we are talking about moving that source of high fidelity information from the federal government to the state government, as we go from a kind of a hierarchical top down to a kind of a spoke or a shared intelligence community, which means there may be differences in the way our two states are handling cybersecurity information, and how do we make sure we're ingesting that and we're getting that out to our local businesses and folks that matter, right? Our hospitals, our police departments. How do we do that? I think there is a lot of support, and even it sounds like grant funding that's going to be available to help states get this set up for themselves. However, we remain to see how that will play out based on how states are going to prioritize the funding and how they implement it.
Yeah, that's my arguably very, very important funding. There were quite a few grants out of the Department of Homeland that states benefited from. Um, I mean, today, CISA is not funded today.
That's
They're
right. That's
working for
right.
free or they're furloughed right now, and those are clearly critical services. I think it's interesting what you just said as far as, Indiana could be doing one thing or getting one, or what they might have one way to address the cybersecurity threats within the city, whether it's private or public industry within their state. Pennsylvania could be another way. And I believe you could, I'm sure you can agree that we have like an overload or abundance of alerts going on and information. There's just so much information to sift from wherever you get it. What are some of your thoughts, or as far as how we can, let's say, the federal government is, kind of stepping back and it goes to the states. Would it be more like the state coalition kind of thing, or what would you suggest or look at to how we can continue for that collaboration so we're not reinventing the wheel?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So the MS-ISAC, the multi-state ISAC, was funded at a federal level, and now that funding has ended. So there's already a consortium of states that are starting to work together to figure out how they kind of recreate that trusted source of information. I think that will be hopefully a service that most states will come back into, and we will be able to recreate a lot of that trust between that sharing entity in multiple states. I think the opportunity to share back up is back up into this entity is something that will be widely valued. The MS-ISAC is much the same way, but I don't think that all states were really participating in a bi-directional way. And I think that it's really important for us to let our neighbors know what we're seeing, what threats are landing on our doorstep, to give them time to prepare to defend against those things.
Yeah, you mentioned the MS-ISAC, and yeah, that was defunded with the CIS from I guess around this time last year was one of the first cuts to go from this administration. But I was just hanging out with CISA today. I told you that. Love CISA. I love my local CISA folks. I hang out with them all the time. We open line
Mhm.
and get a
Yeah,
great information from them. Great support, the services they provide. But there are like I had no idea how many ISACs were out there, from the water ISAC to nonprofit ISACs,
that's right.
real estate ISACs. I mean, there's like so many ISACs available
Well,
per
I would just
industry.
Yeah,
Good.
absolutely. I want to take a second here while we're talking about ISACs to mention the Research and Education Network ISAC, which is higher ed and the National Science Foundation, amongst others, have come together. And this ISAC is actually sponsored by Indiana University here in Bloomington. So not only are they still around and doing a great job at sharing amongst higher ed, but trying to figure out what their role is, as the cybersecurity legislation changes, how are they going to become better suited to share with the community, right? Whether that be K through 12 or small and local businesses. So, as you mentioned, there are a lot of ISACs out there, and I bet you they're all kind of trying to figure out how they retool and become a better resource in their sectors and in their communities.
So is that how you communicate with other higher educational institutions? Like, do you have a coalition or a working group so you can talk to Temple or you can talk to
That's right.
University of North Carolina, whatever you do? Okay.
I can't speak to all the members that are in the research in the REN ISAC, but yes, we are. Not only does it include universities in the U.S., but also in the Five Eyes. So Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and others also participate in the REN ISAC because we have a unique need. Right, there's a lot of research that goes on that can be the target of attackers because of the intellectual property that's involved. So yeah, the REN ISAC is neighborly. We can talk to our folks here in the U.S., but we're also sharing information with folks in Australia and New Zealand, for example.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love education. So I'm like thinking, there's so many different education styles or presentations or models of how we're disseminating education to our students and cohorts and professional services, but to all get together to discuss the cybersecurity aspect, I would think there's probably a lot of similarities there. What's some of the threats, if you don't mind sharing? I'd love to hear. What are some of the threats that you've learned from some of the other participants in that ISAC?
We abide by the traffic light protocol, so I really don't want to share out of turn what some other universities have experienced. But what the things that we're seeing in the news, which I can speak to, is a direct targeting of donor data of universities, right? And we've seen some of the Ivy Leagues show up in the news recently because that information has been exposed. And, those things can, while they don't impact students on a daily necessarily a direct correlation there. The donor data is responsible for a lot of funding that can fund specific programs or grants or scholarships for students. So those things are really important for us to protect. But what we're seeing in some cases are students are not necessarily the target of large attacks, but they're more social engineering, more of a working on trying to either take advantage of someone's position in an athletics program or their involvement in a research lab. And so not only do we need to protect our students and teach them how to be good digital citizens in order to protect themselves, but not only is it research that needs protected with defense contracts and very important life-saving medicines that are going to save people's lives. But then we're seeing things which you might not think are a high value target, but donor data for universities tends to open up people in those populations for targeted attacks, right? And so we have a responsibility to protect those type of things as well. So those are just some of the things that are going on in higher ed, but we're still susceptible to all the same attacks that we're seeing in private sector as well.
I was just testing you. Red light, traffic light, stop. I got you.
It's totally okay.
Yeah. I love that you said that because, yeah, vendor donor information. If I know so and so donated $1 million, well, that, that might mean that they have another $1 million I could steal. Or, um, I've seen quite a few educational institutions, not necessarily higher learning, but some school districts that have been a victim of vendor fraud, which is
Oh,
so sad because, gosh, these schools need the money.
that's
Um,
right.
what about do you think, oh, how can I phrase this? Okay, so let's go back to the scenario that, we're kind of all on our own. We have our ISACs and our state and local government, but what do you think would be the biggest disadvantage to, or do you even think there would be a disadvantage by not having like a CISA or not having the top down from our federal government as far as cyber threats, cyber intel, cyber coordination, etc.?
Yeah, I think there is a real disadvantage to not having that federal level of cyber defense and threat intelligence. I don't think states are necessarily equipped to deal with nation state actors. Pressure from the brunt of entire countries, cyber espionage divisions like North Korea and Russia, and so I think we do need that understanding and that intelligence from a federal level who have that context and understanding of the motivations of these groups, and helping us understand where those attacks are also being carried out in other places in the United States and around the world. If ransomware campaigns are amping up in specific areas, we've really in the past relied heavily on the federal government to let us know, so that we can put additional controls around our protected research data, or look at hardening our Active Directory environment, or whatever it happens to be, where that attack is taking place in our neighbor's area, is helping us to understand and protect. And so I think it's difficult for states to kind of create that wealth of knowledge that the federal government has put together and collected over the last 30 years.
Yeah, you just reminded me about the research. So I used to work for CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and I know that there was some colleges, universities that would request data from CMS related to like healthcare, diseases and vaccines and all those things to use that data for research. So I imagine that that's another data set that you're responsible for as a WCISO at Notre Dame. That data you guys do research there. So would you think that I'm just thinking out loud here too, like for CMS, they have their own set of guidelines too. So I feel like we would still get some support there, or whether it's 171 COC, some kind of um framework or security and privacy control sets that we would need to be in compliance with in order to operate or have connections with the federal government agencies. But like as far as like the intel from the NSA and the FBI and the Secret Service and kind of like those agencies that are DISA even, that and Homeland Security that are out like constantly with a pulse. I don't think it's they're not going to give it to us at all, but I'm interested to see how they're going to, because no shade, but I feel like sometimes they are kind of behind the ball too. I don't rely just on federal government intel, because they are, for some things like I just mentioned, yeah, boots on the ground. Some things have nothing to do with us, right? Or we don't necessarily get hit directly or immediately, but boots on the ground. I love that you said that. Right now we deal with phishing every day. We're dealing with people banging on our external perimeter firewalls all the time trying to get in, those type of things. So
Yeah.
I do still feel like we're gonna get some support, but maybe I am curious what that would look like. And the research data too. I just think that, yeah, you have a lot of sensitive data, not just from a student perspective and faculty, PII, probably PHI too, and research data. Is that accurate?
We don't we don't have medical facilities, and so we're not
Okay.
beholden to health record compliance. But every school has compliance requirements around student data, around other specific federal regulations, and so we're all working on the protecting those things as is required, by NIST and others, and we do have CMMC contracts, and so we're working on making sure that we're prepared for those. Going back to talking about what the federal government shares and doesn't share, and why it actually might impede sharing is because we don't know about active ongoing investigations. So they may have attacks that are going on, and they may not tell the public or share through their intelligence channels because they're still working on figuring it out or building a case. That would be different, likely, in a shared intelligence model where it's state to state, because we might be more likely to make sure that information is in our neighbor's hands, because perhaps we're not building a case, right? So there can be some impedance there, and I think that we've experienced that in higher education also. But we do have good relationships with a lot of folks in federal law enforcement, CISA, Secret Service, et cetera. And we want to continue those good relationships, whether or not the federal government is funding a specific unit to provide threat intelligence. We hope that we will still continue to receive messages of warning to help us understand what threats we might be at our doorstep.
Okay. Well, we're gonna just get rid of Ohio there. We could be neighbors. You're
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would definitely consider everyone in the United States a neighbor. And for that matter, north and south of the border as well. We should all be sharing intelligence to the point where we're protecting our people and their privacy. That's what it boils down to in the end, right? Is we're all here to protect the people that we live next door to. And to do that, we take care of everyone, not just the neighbors whose doors we can knock on.
So let me ask you this, just as far as like information overload or fatigue, so to speak, as far as alerts. I'm sure you're on a lot of the same distros I am, and reading the same articles and listening
Yeah.
to podcasts and all the things. How do you, as the deputy CISO, prioritize those materials to make sure that you're getting the most value when you need it?
Yeah. Well, I think, one, you have to know your environment, because you can't protect what you don't know about. And then you need to have a good system of prioritizing what's important to your organization, what's important to your leadership. And so taking that risk-based approach is, I think, really where it's important to distill those priority alerts to the top and say, here's something that we actually need to put effort into as a priority one, and continue to document. Don't let those things that are secondary and tertiary fall off the list, but recognize that, one, communicating with your leadership about what you're seeing, working with them to understand what they want to take action on, and working together on that, because, like you said, alert fatigue, it's like drinking from the fire hose. You couldn't possibly come to your leadership with 100 different alerts and expect, any, informed decision to come out of that. So I think it's a lot of distilling, taking that risk-based approach, and then presenting to your organization the things that you should be taking action on, in the immediate.
So drop us some faucets or vectors for this information. You mentioned, for you specifically in your role, you mentioned the Redwood, you mentioned the research ISAC. What else has been invaluable to you for supporting your program and your strategy there at Notre Dame?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So we're also a member of the EDUCAUSE Consortium, which is another higher education group that has a specific cybersecurity and privacy wing that is comprised of many BTAA schools and ACC schools, private institutions across the country. They do a great job of intelligence sharing and helping the larger schools, helping some of the smaller schools who maybe don't have the capacity or the funding for programs to share information that way. Again, Notre Dame is very lucky where we are in the community, and the the contacts that we have, we feel we are doing a pretty good job on receiving those signals. I think the important part to understand is that it's the distillation of those signals to the immediate threats or vulnerabilities that you have in your environment. And so having people who have very similar environments to you to share that information with and understand is important, right? Education is that's why we have these ISACs in these different sectors. It's because they're all thinking about security as it pertains to their specific motivations or mission. So not only is there the REN-ISAC, EDUCAUSE, but there are tons of other little groups that have been stood up. C-Core is another one. And we just try to really create a good community of open intelligence sharing. And then where non-attribution is needed, we can use organizations like the REN-ISAC in order to share intelligence without attribution, should that be a requirement. Plus our coordination with the federal law enforcement connections that we have in the Secret Service. Indiana ISAC is coming online, and we hope to be part of that organization as well. So I think we have a pretty broad community of intelligence partners.
That's awesome. I love that. This is cool. I want to come visit. I'm gonna come visit. I don't know when I'm coming to Indiana, but I'm gonna stop by and see you.
Yeah. You absolutely should. We'd love to have you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'd love to see a campus too. I know it's amazing. I can only imagine all the great things that are going on from the cybersecurity professionals and all the next gen of cyber professionals that are being cultivated right now, which is super dope.
You're speaking my language. I love when we talk about talent pipeline and helping new folks enter into the cybersecurity field. As part of that, I help organize the Bloomington B-Sides conference that we have every year, which is a community-driven cybersecurity conference. You may be aware of that, but your listeners may not be. And so B-Sides is an international community, and there are events in Rome, in Las Vegas, in Milan, and we all have the same mission, which is to bring cybersecurity to the community, help locals understand how to protect themselves, local businesses, how to protect their important intellectual property and their services. It's something that I love to do. And when we talk about how we bring more people into the cybersecurity field, I think there's more than enough people who are willing to share their experience and help others find their way.
What's the date on your B-sides?
Well, actually, we just decided that last week. So it'll be October 2nd and 3rd here in Bloomington, Indiana at the Monroe Convention Center. You can find information at bsidesbloomington.org. So thanks for asking, Jess. Great plug. Thank you.
Of course. Well, I'm going to do a shameless one. I'm an organizer for B-Sides Harrisburg, and ours
Oh,
is May 29th in Harrisburg, Central PA, and all the things. But I love B-Sides too. I support all the B-Sides really I can go to. B-Sides Philly is near and dear to me too. So that's awesome you do that, Ian. I'm sure you bring all your students. It's just such a great time. So anybody out in that area want to make a road trip, I don't know how far it is. I'll check my October schedule, but make sure you check
sure.
out Bloomington B-Sides, Bloomingdale, sorry. Bloomington or Dale?
Bloomington. Yeah,
It's
Bloomington,
Bloomington.
Indiana.
Okay. Bloomington, India.
bsidesbloomington.org. That's right. That's
Yes,
right.
fantastic. So,
Yeah.
lastly, this has been awesome. And I like to always ask my guests this question. If you could give your younger 18-year-old self, little baby Ian, 18-year-old Ian, what advice would you give him?
Hmm. Wow, I think that's a pretty common question, but I have to admit, not one that put a lot of thought into. I think the thing that I would try to tell myself, which is the same that I try to tell others, is give yourself grace. and understanding. The same grace that you would give others, give yourself. I think we often put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and maybe, there's more negative self-talk than there is positive self-talk. And I think I would have been a lot more comfortable in my skin if I had just told myself that I'm working just as hard as everyone else is, and, have a little grace and compassion for the hard work that you're doing.
Love that. Shout out to everybody. Just give yourself a little grace. We
That's
all
right.
doing what we can, and as long as we moving forward, and you seem to be doing all right with your guitars and your piano back there. You speak in our producer's language. He's a drummer.
That's
And you're the deputy
right.
CISO for Notre Dame. Very, very cool. I know that you're making a big difference out there, and we appreciate you joining us on the show, dropping all them gems. Anybody in education should definitely investigate and join any of those organizations that you mentioned. And I'm sure you're open for some new friends. They can reach out to you on LinkedIn. Cool.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. Build a bigger table. That's right, Jess. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks might have about the topics we've talked about. And yeah, always looking to, widen that network. So absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, this was great. And thanks to all the listeners out there. We appreciate your time. Can't wait to see you next month for whatever topic it is. It'll be amazing, I promise.
I
But we
look
won't
forward
have
to it.
Gian though. But he'll
No,
be
I'll
there.
be
We have him
listening though. I'll
today.
tune in.
Uh,
I will.
okay, you tune in. All right, thank
Thanks,
you so
Jess.
much. Just take care, everybody.
Bye bye.
Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode of the CISO Stories podcast. Please subscribe to the CISO Stories podcast, and you will receive a new story each Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll see you next week for a new episode. Thanks for joining.